My name is Tyler, and I deliver pizzas in a small forgotten town tucked away in northern Canada. I'm writing this right after my shift, trembling as I remember what just happened. The town I deliver in clings to the edge of a vast, shadowy mountain range. Around 25,000 souls are scattered across the foothills, most of them farmers or loggers. There's a college too, but it's nothing special, just another worn-down building in this place that feels like it's slowly being swallowed by the wilderness. The store I work for is different. We don't just deliver within the city limits like most places. We'll drive out into the woods, the hills, the lonely farms far beyond town. Because that's where most people live, in the forgotten corners. Some of these drives take over an hour, and we're not expected back until at least that long has passed. That's plenty of time for strange things to happen, and they do. We're open until 5 a.m. every night, and with the isolation, the dark, and the endless hours, I've seen things I try not to think about. But tonight was different. It started out like any other Tuesday. I was getting terrible tips and sinking into the usual pit of despair that comes with knowing this is my life, delivering pizzas to people who don't even bother to say thanks. I had already been out on a few long hauls to the far-flung farms, each more remote than the last. The tips were non-existent, and I was exhausted. Then the order chime went off again, another one. I sighed, half expecting another trek into the deep woods. This time, it was a new address one I hadn't seen before, far outside the city. My stomach churned with irritation, but then I saw the delivery instructions. Big tip if you follow directions. Take the pizza inside, upstairs to the bedroom. The door will be unlocked. Instructions like this aren't unusual. Out here people can be lazy or just strange. Still, the promise of a big tip got my heart racing. I needed the money. So I didn't stop for coffee or anything. I sped out there as fast as I could, eager to finally make a decent tip. After about 25 minutes on winding dirt roads, I arrived. The house was wrong. From the road, it looked fine, but up close the decay was obvious. The roof sagged in places, windows were shattered, and the front door was missing entirely. No one had lived here for years. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. I grabbed the pizza and stepped out of the car, trying to ignore the creeping unease that was wrapping around me like the cold night air. That's when I heard it, a sound from the top left window, the room I was supposed to deliver to. Laughter, but not the kind of laughter that comes from joy or humor. This was wrong. It was like someone was trying to imitate laughter, but had never really heard it before. It was distorted, artificial, and it chilled me to my core. I stood frozen, barely able to whisper, "Hello?" The word felt feeble, swallowed by the eerie silence that followed. Then, from inside the house, a voice, strained, broken, called out, "I'm very hungry. Please hurry." It wasn't the words themselves that terrified me. It was the way they were spoken. The cadence was off, like whatever was speaking was struggling to sound human, but failing. It was hollow, desperate. The voice echoed in my head, gnawing at my sanity. I dropped the pizza on the porch, turned, and bolted. I don't remember how I made it back to my car, but I do remember the way my hands trembled as I started the engine and floored it out of there. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was watching me from that broken window. Even now, sitting in the safety of my own home, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. That whatever was up there is still waiting, still hungry. And I can't stop hearing that laughter. The front door was ajar, and I froze in my tracks. Something about it so ordinary yet unsettling sent a chill down my spine. My heart hammered against my ribs, faster and faster, as though it wanted to break free from my chest. A whisper in the back of my mind told me to turn around, to leave this place behind. But I couldn't. I had to follow the rules. Leaving the pizzas on the porch would get me fired, and that thought alone grounded me, even as every instinct screamed for me to run. Swallowing the knot of fear, I made the short but excruciating walk to the door and knocked. The dull thud of my fist against the old wood echoed unnervingly, and the door creaked open just a little wider. The hinges groaned, almost like a wounded animal, as the sound scratched its way into my ears. I stood there, pulse pounding, waiting. Silence. I knocked again, this time louder, and called out, "Pizza's here." Still, no one answered. Relief flooded me. Maybe no one was home. Maybe I could just leave after all. But as I turned to go, a voice cold, rasping, and dripping with malice slithered out from the dark interior of the house. "Come in." The words slithered through the air, making my skin crawl. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the dark gap in the door. I wanted to believe I imagined it, that the eerie voice was just in my head. But then, it came again, louder, more insistent. "Come in." My hands trembled uncontrollably as a wave of dread washed over me. The voice repeated itself, over and over, like a dark chant. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I dropped the pizzas where I stood, not caring about the consequences. I ran. I bolted down the steps, my feet barely touching the ground, and hurled myself into my car. My shaking hands fumbled with the keys for what felt like an eternity before I finally started the engine and sped away, tires screeching against the pavement. My breath came in ragged gasps all the way back to the restaurant. When I finally stopped the car, nausea overtook me, and I stumbled out, barely managing to throw up in the parking lot. But I was alive. That's what mattered. I convinced myself it was over. The next morning, though, my nightmare resurfaced. I woke to heavy banging on my door. 2 police officers stood there, grim-faced, their eyes hollow. They asked me a few questions, but I barely registered their words. Then one of them stepped forward, his gaze locking with mine. "2 delivery guys were found dead last night," he said, voice low, almost hesitant. My heart stopped as he pulled a photograph from his jacket. This was found with them. The image showed 3 faces. 2 had red X's scrawled over them, their identities erased. But the 3rd face was untouched. It was mine. I looked up at the officer, my head spinning, and just before the darkness overtook me, I saw his expression change. A look that told me my fate was sealed. I left Detroit the next day, and I've never gone back. I was on deliveries that night, looking forward to pocketing some extra cash. The scent of hot pizza filled my car as I drove from one house to the next, the insulated bags keeping everything warm. The first couple of stops went smoothly, good transactions, decent tips. The 3rd one, well, that got messy when I clumsily dropped the customer's food, and the skimpy tip I got afterward felt deserved. It was dark by the time I headed out for my 4th and final delivery, a place that still haunts me. For anonymity's sake, I'll just call it 5 Trailer Park Lane. It took me a bit to find the place. My headlights eventually caught the small reflective number 5, stuck to the side of a worn-down trailer. There were no cars parked nearby, and not a single light was on inside, which struck me as odd. People usually left a porch light on when expecting a delivery. I knocked 3 times, each one echoing in the still night. Nothing at first. But then, a shadow stirred behind the grimy glass window. Slowly, the door creaked open, and an old woman emerged, dressed in a strange, outdated suit. Her expression was one of confusion. "Here's your delivery," I said, offering the pizza. "Delivery?" she asked, her voice thin and distant. "I didn't order any pizza." I glanced down at the receipt, frowning. "Is this 5 Trailer Park Lane?" I asked. "Yes," she whispered, but her face twisted into a mask of horror. "But I didn't order any pizza." Something cold trickled down my spine. "Are you Marie?" I asked, hoping I was just confused. The old woman's eyes widened with terror, her lips trembling. "Who did you say?" she whispered. "Marie," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper now too. The woman's face turned pale. Marie died 5 years ago." Suddenly, everything felt wrong. The darkness outside seemed to press in, and the air felt thick and suffocating. I stammered an apology, barely hearing her response as I hurried back to my car. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, driving in silence back to the restaurant. When I told my coworkers what had happened, they laughed, assuming I was joking. But the confusion on my face must have convinced them otherwise. Eventually, they reasoned that the woman probably suffered from dementia, ordered the pizza, and then forgot about it. They shrugged it off and placed the pizza in the oven, just in case she called back. Closing time finally came. After cleaning up and splitting tips, I nearly forgot about the strange delivery. But when I spotted the crumpled receipt in my pocket, the one from Marie, my curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I decided to swing by the trailer park once more, just to check. It was 11:15 when I arrived. The reflective 5 gleamed under my headlights again, and the trailer was just as dark and still as before. But this time, something caught my eye. There was a bright yellow notice taped to the door. As I approached, the word eviction loomed out at me in bold print. Confused, I scanned the notice and froze. The eviction had taken place 5 years ago. My heart thudded in my chest as my eyes drifted to the padlock securing the door, a padlock that hadn't been there earlier. With shaky hands, I fumbled for the delivery receipt, where we always jotted down the phone number for reference. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I punched in the digits. The tones of each number seemed unnaturally loud, cutting through the eerie silence around me. I hit send and brought the phone to my ear. Nothing. Then the 3 unmistakable tones echoed in my ear, followed by the hollow, automated message. The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service. I lowered the phone slowly, everything clicking into place with a dreadful clarity. The woman had told me Marie had died 5 years ago. The eviction had been 5 years ago. The phone number was no longer in service. So who ordered that pizza? And more terrifyingly, who answered that door?